because I decided to forego the little intro thing this round. Just because Travis was here, we were talking about like monkeys, and I was telling him there's this lab here that I guess I don't know if they do like testing or if they're like using them for genes or whatever. Travis probably knows.
I mean, it's different for different things.
But there's a whole island where I don't know if like they put them out there because like Travis was saying they're a retired breeder or what. But there's literally an entire island not that far from my house where it's just an island full of macaques.
Interesting.
There's signs around it, and you can drive by boat and like see them on the beach just hanging out and stuff. And
that's crazy.
Always a running joke in high school, like who's going to go out to Morgan Island and live with the macaque for a night and get how many ever diseases they probably carry out there.
Yeah, right. Oof. Crazy.
Things we don't want to have.
That's right. But things we do want to have is episode 83 of Snakes and Stogies, which this is.
Yes.
This is brought to you by the fine folks at Puget Sound Pythons. Macaque, that's those they're monkeys. They're native to like India and all over Southeast Asia, right?
Yes.
Just I thought it's not just India, like they have them in China and stuff too, don't they?
Yeah, I think Thailand, and there's
everywhere.
Species in Japan.
Yeah. So there are these primates that are, I guess, used for testing in some regard or something. There's a place out in the sticks that has a whole facility of them, and they're always I was telling Wyman, there's like if you go on Indeed, there's always a job opening there. Like they constantly have openings in multiple positions usually too. Like their turnover must be horrible, but who knows? That would be kind of a depressing job. Henry.
Little bit.
So Dr. Travis Wyman is with us once again. Cody is going to hop back on here in a few minutes and talk about the RPP event before Daytona. And then we have a bunch of really dumbed down questions to ask Wyman that will probably make him wonder if we have some sort of mental impediment.
No. You guys just are not as familiar with this crazy stuff as I am. So that's all it is.
My list of questions is always stuff that I always think about and forget to ask you. And it's really like sort of bizarre, how did this get here kind of stuff. But I told Phil to put together some questions too, but I don't know if he actually did it or not. He just sent me.
I did send you. I sent you a GIF of Jack Black saluting.
Yes.
But I have questions, and I have a couple other things I wanted to, because I have questions for raps, right?
Yes.
Raps.
We can talk about that a little bit, but we're orchestrating a more in-depth episode with this guy right here and some of the other folks involved. So.
Yes.
It's just a matter of getting everyone's schedule together at once.
Yes. I also have unique ball python questions as of 48 minutes ago. So I definitely want to touch base on that later on when things have equaled out, so to speak.
What are you smoking upon?
Well, I'm still sick, and because of that, I don't want to necessarily. First of all, I want to be able to enjoy the smoke that I'm going to smoke, but I also didn't want to smoke anything too crazy because I feel like I'd be wasting it if it doesn't pan out. So I just got a Lennox for tonight. I figured it was bold enough that I might enjoy it in some regard, and if I don't enjoy it, who cares? It's cheap.
I'm not feeling well, and my throat is stuffy. Let me smoke this cigar that's going to turn my saliva into like molasses.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have COVID. I can taste everything and smell everything, and I don't have fever-like symptoms. But everyone keeps telling me it's allergies, but I don't know, man.
I've been sneezing a lot lately, and I think it's we've had a lot of rain, and I think it's like there's usually like spring first shows up, I get a little nasally and stuff because of allergies, and then it goes away, and then usually there's like another spike or two somewhere in there where I all of a sudden just feel stuffed up. And
well, I mean, I think it's the normal crud that we get throughout the year, but because we haven't seen other humans for a year, And now I'm getting something that normally would happen at Christmas. Now I'm getting it in July. So who the hell knows?
Yeah, it has been predicted that we are going to have a very nasty cold RSV and flu season this year because, when everybody was wearing masks, they weren't getting passed around, and now everybody's not going to wear masks, and so everybody's just going to get hit with everything.
Yeah. It makes sense.
You could keep wearing your mask, and that would help, but try getting people to wear masks when there's a pandemic, and it's
ain't no commie doctor gonna tell me to wear a mask and that these colors don't run. That cold virus ain't got nothing.
Right.
I'll put it in a Randy Macho Man Savage headlock and feed it to Slim Jim while I take it down.
Amen, brother.
Codith.
How's it going, guys?
Oh, he lives.
I'm here.
going well.
He is here.
Here I am.
Let me do this, turn up my volume without burning my screen. So real quick, we got these Grand Perfecto Romacraft, and this is the last one. I've tried all of them. So the Aquitaine, the regular Cro-Magnon, the Intemperance Connecticut, this Intemperance Maduro, and then the Whiskey Rebellion. The Connecticut is awesome. Cro-Magnon's awesome. Aquitaine's awesome. We can get back to that later. But Cody is here to talk about the upcoming party before Daytona.
Yeah,
I didn't really get a good chance to plug it other than just kind of cruising by it the other night, and then with everything going on, I was just distracted, ran out of time, yapped too much like I always do, and ran out of time just going from one tangent to another. So figured jump on, say my piece real quick, and let you guys get on for the rest of your evening. So, you guys have anything to say before I take a breath of air and talk for the next 15 minutes?
We're looking forward to it, man.
Fire it off.
So it is going to be catered. So if you need another excuse to go, there's going to be food. There's usually a lot of alcohol. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, when you're dealing with reptile folks, there's definitely going to be some booze there, for sure. But there's going to be catered food, and it's going to be a local catered barbecue that we've had before. It was we had it catered. I think it was for the last Carpet Fest. Justin, I don't remember because you know what? I didn't get any other than the last scraps.
Yeah.
I was too busy bouncing around, being a host and not being. It's way more fun to go as a patron than go, be the host. Because when you're the host, you got to do. You have to make sure everything is staying on track and people are being good and all that stuff. And then, of course, you're socializing with everybody. And then before you know it, it's 4:30 in the morning and you haven't eaten yet. So that's kind of what happened to me last time. And I think it was that good barbecue. Was it?
It's saucy and Southern. I just looked it up.
Okay. Yeah. So we learned about those guys through our good friend Matt Cruz, who runs Wild Thing Exotic Animals in Middleburg. It's an exotic pet shop. And those guys were friends of theirs and had catered for them and had a food truck at that time or something. I'm not sure if they still have the food truck, but they also catered for a Buzz for Buzztails event that was held at Carl Barden's place, Medtoxin Venom Laboratories and Reptile Discovery Center. And that's where I actually did get to enjoy their food because I was there for the Buzz for Buzztail event and I wasn't putting it on. So I actually got to enjoy the food. It was really good. They have they do their own barbecue sauce. So they have some really cool, they had some blueberry barbecue sauce that was obviously made with real blueberries, and it was really good. So the food is good. That's going to be catered. So the event's going to be August 19th, which I said on the last week or last Friday. When was that? When was I on with you guys? Thursday, whatever. All those days. All those days just blend together.
It actually went to midnight, so it counts.
Yeah. So Friday, Thursday into Friday. Interview Thursday
and Friday.
Yeah. So I touched on it a little bit, but it's going to be August 19th. It's going to be a Thursday. It's going to be the Thursday that the Thursday that falls before the Friday that sets off the Daytona Expo with all the talks and where everybody just starts getting there for setup and what have you. So since we weren't able to do a Carpet Fest this year, and a Brony Ales was coming right around the corner as well, since we put on that event virtually the year before.
Has that been a year already since a Brony Ales?
It's going on, and I can't remember again. Like the days just blur together, the hours, the weeks, everything. It just blurs together. But so kind of incorporating a little bit of that in as well, for just kind of all-encompassing big reptile preservation party where the funds earned are gonna go to a few different places, including virus research like before, which I think all the funds for that part of it are gonna just be donated to UF, the University of Florida, to kind of allocate the way, to what needs to be done or what have you. And then as well as some other different conservation initiatives, one of them going to Mexicam Safari, which is in Mexico, and does work with Abronia and conservation initiatives with that. So all that's unraveling as well. But so, we figured Daytona was a good time, at least around there. Obviously, you don't want to do it the weekend of Daytona because that's going to be, competing for people's time. But that Thursday is going to be, if people are rolling in, a day or two early and want to come out and have some good food, hang out with some awesome people, see some cool reptiles, and listen to some good talks, because we're going to have a speaker list lined up, and all of that is slowly getting posted up as we have speakers that are coming, Steve Tillis being one of them. And, so there'll be those guys to enjoy listening to them talk about this and that while you're enjoying your food and your adult beverage of choice. Or, if you don't drink, you could have a turnip or something. I don't know what people drink when they don't drink.
Man-moses?
Man-moses. Oh, well, man-moses, those are for the morning after to get your day going. Now we're saying man-mosa, not mimosa. Man-mosa was taught to me by my beautiful wife, Pia, who showed me this years and years ago. And a man-mosa is basically just Blue Moon and orange juice versus champagne. So you've got that beer that complements with an orange already. Basically half the glass is orange juice, half the glass is Blue Moon. And it makes for a reason to drink in the morning before you start your day.
They are very delicious.
They're very delicious, and they could be dangerous. Definitely drink them when you don't have anything to do. Certainly don't drink them before you work venomous snakes, but they are nice. They are a nice way to start maybe a Sunday morning or something with the friends, or whatever, the day after this reptile preservation party, when you need a little bit of the hair of the dog to get back in the game, to get you through Daytona weekend.
Crawl back to zero.
It's going to be tough, man, because it's going to be, the reptile preservation party. It's probably going to be a party following, then I have to be around for Daytona weekend, which I jokingly call my spring break, like the Cancun for reptile people. You got the beach, you've got drinking, it's the weekend where I kind of get away from everything that we do, and I could just kind of socialize and drink like it's the end of the world, and then back to usual on Monday. But so there's going to be a lot going on that we picked that Thursday, because if people want to make it out, that's great. It's already tying into
it's not a far drive either too, right? It's only like an hour and 15-ish.
I think
GPS is an hour and a half, but I got there sooner than that.
Yeah, I guess guess depend on which way you're coming from and which road you take. It's about an hour 40 for us just going on country roads, and it's an easy drive. You're not hitting traffic any of the way through there until you hit Daytona, and then it's just a couple street lights and you're at the Ocean Center. And so it's pretty easy. Sometimes we won't even get a hotel down there or stay down there, and we'll just drive back if there's not anything happening. The parties the last few years kind of seem to have died down a little bit, where we would rage until the sun comes up, years past, and then it seems like a lot of people have been kind of retiring around midnight, and I don't know, maybe everybody's just getting older and just doesn't want to do it anymore.
Old.
Yeah, it also could be because Fish and Wildlife also is, taken away. I mean, like, I don't want to get into the politics of all that, but I would say that, there's a lot of stuff you have to do here in Florida to be a vendor at the expo. Like, all these out-of-staters have to fill out Florida import permits to bring in all of their inventory from out of state. Doesn't matter if it's a bunch of corn snakes or something. If it's coming in from out of state, they're going to have, green tree pythons, whatever it is, they're going to have to put on that. It's a no-cost import permit, but they have to fill it out what they're bringing. And then they have to get a class 3 permit to be able to sell. Fish and Wildlife is obviously checking all of those things as they go around to the tables and harass people for their paperwork. Obviously all the big constrictors and stuff are on the prohibited list now. A lot of the things are slowly becoming on the prohibited list, and I mean, a lot of the stuff, the reptile industry made their bed and have to lie in it. Not a lot, like a few, and this is stuff that's happened, 4 decades ago. But all the new keepers are having to kind of suffer for that. Like I said on the last interview, I would say that the general, like these days, the general reptile keeping, profession, people are a lot better than they used to be. I think most people don't want their animals out. They don't want the PR nightmare. They don't want to lose their animal to begin with. They want to make sure that these things are contained. And I would say most people are very responsible in this industry, but it's the handful of people that aren't, that have helped create these new regulations. But a lot of them, like, this is stuff that's been in the making for decades, but enough of the general public has complained about, let's say, tegus and iguanas in their yard, ripping up their flowers or whatever. And now the state has to do something about it. And if it's putting them on a prohibited list to get the general public to say, it's like, hey, this is what we did, this is what we're doing. And the general public goes, thanks, it's like, they don't care. They don't see the reason why you should have any reptiles at all. It's like, we're just on a constant, we're constantly defending ourselves. We're on the offensive all the time. And it's, it's just tough. So I think, like, we're Tinley and a lot of these other shows that are in other states that haven't restricted large constrictors and other things, those shows are becoming a little bit more popular because of that, versus Daytona, where it still goes on, the show goes on, but it's just, it's not the Daytona of legends that you heard about, a decade ago or more.
It's going to be a good year.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think this year is going to be one of the best years that we've had in probably a decade, because there's so many people coming out of the woodworks. I'm very optimistic for this year, but I do see what you're saying.
Yeah, no,
I do hope people go to this party as a result, because there's going to be more people.
No, I mean, I do too. I 100% hope that everything, is it goes good and more guest attendants show up and it's successful. Not for our own party, but just for Daytona. Like, I think that it is what it is. But we as keepers in general, just as long as we keep trying to be optimistic and doing the right thing, and like we say, like, integrity is what you do when nobody's watching. As long as everybody's doing that stuff and being good and policing themselves, we should have an industry for years to come, hopefully, and all of that. But to not get off on a total tangent, yeah. So it's so anybody that's listening, the Thursday before Daytona, August 19th, we're gonna have barbecue, we're gonna have beer, we're gonna have drinks, we're gonna have talks, we're gonna have good people. We do encourage, and I've been asked to say this by all of our everybody that's contributing to promoting this and all of that. Please, if you're hearing this and you are coming, let us know that you're coming. There's a Facebook page for this, and you'll start seeing more promotion as it gets closer to that time. But if you are going to go, just click that going button so we can kind of get a gauge on how many people are going to be there, so we know for food and drinks and stuff like that. Just like. And
how do people that are actually going to attend, and as well, how are people on the internet buying tickets?
So I do believe that that's gonna obviously it's all online, but I think you can navigate your way through.
There's a link on the Facebook event page.
Okay.
For the event, there's a link to all that. So
there you go. Thank you, Justin. Thank you for that. I have, as you guys could probably tell, I haven't really Yeah, well, thank you very much, because I haven't so much. Sorry, I'm standing out on a roadway. We just dropped off some rodents, and I'm at Big Dog's sports grill and restaurant with Daniel. He's inside eating, and I just dropped out to come and do this. So you're going to hear motorcycles driving by and stuff. So yeah, what Justin said, through the Facebook thing, you can navigate your way to purchase a ticket. I'm sure we'll do stuff at the door as well if people show up and have, brought a friend or brought people. Obviously everybody's money is green, so we'll take that. Obviously, it's going to conservation and helping to. And then we've got all of our sponsors that are helping with the food and all that. And I'll plug all the sponsors here in a sec that are helping making this possible. Because when you do these events, of course, you do need some sponsorships to pay for all the things like food and additional seating and booze and all the good stuff. So we definitely appreciate everybody who's sponsored so far. I guess this is a good time to just get into that, huh? We've got,
if there's anyone that's interested in becoming a sponsor, get in contact with Pia. There's a couple different tier options. She's the one to talk to if you want to be a sponsor. And then there is an auction that we are putting together. So if you have an item or a voucher or something that you'd like to donate as well, contact me or Pia, and we will make that happen.
Yeah, I also want to touch base too. Is there's a few people that I've reached out to that I know follow the show that are planning on sponsoring. If you do still plan on sponsoring, feel free. I believe it's reptile preservation at gmail.com. Is that correct, Cody?
Yeah.
That sounds right.
Okay.
Yep.
And I also have some local to me, South Florida herpetofauna artists that are going to be doing some digital graphic art that'll be up for auction for logos or whatever, some voucher type stuff, as well as some actual physical art from a couple local artists that are tip top, just crazy reptile and amphibian art. So we're going to get those up in the auction as well. So it's not just going to be, the stereotypical cliche auction items. We're getting more art and some books and some other stuff out there. So it'll be awesome.
Yeah, right now we're compiling everything. I don't know that there's an actual date as to when I think the auction to start. So we're still sort of planning that, but we are getting stuff together for it. So if you have something you want to throw in, please let one of us know.
Yep. Very good. So
but who's sponsoring so far? Who's on the list?
So we've got Cold Blooded Cafe, our good friends at Cold Blooded Cafe, and Sea Serpents, Reptile Racks. We've got Wiregrass Exotics, who is our good friends Dallas and Amanda Rua. They just started up a new exotic pet shop in Alabama called the Wiregrass Exotics, and it's looking like it's going good so far. So these guys are sponsors, and they're just awesome people. They don't need to be sponsors, but they chose to be sponsors, and I'm sure everybody appreciates it. We appreciate them. We actually met Dallas and Amanda at Carpet Fest, and I think it was whatever the first Carpet Fest was here in Florida.
It was 2019, I think.
Well, that was we had a Carpet Fest 2019, so it must have been 2018 when it was at Dave Colombo's place in Cape Coral, Florida. So, and that's where we met Dallas and Amanda, and hit up literally at the end of the party too, and hit it off in the parking lot, and they were close, like 30 minutes or family of theirs lived right down the road from us, so and we got to be close friends until they moved to Alabama. Now they're far friends. So, but they are sponsors, as well as Socrates, who's a good friend of ours who does condors and green tree pythons here in Florida, and the list goes on. I'm trying to dig it all up because all you guys are doing all the promotion stuff. I'm definitely not going to take credit for anything, obviously, because it sounds like I'm clueless to what's going on, because I'm so stuck with my head in the trenches to make sure there's a decent spot for everybody to show up to. That that's kind of the point of having other capable people that could delegate all this different stuff and make sure it's happening.
It takes a village.
It does take a village. But we do have some some more sponsors here that I'm trying to dig up, but and more, I'm sure more sponsors piling in, as the weeks draw closer. So I'm sure we'll be on a couple more interviews or what have you, and we'll plug those guys at that time. So if you are a sponsor and I'm leaving you out, please don't hit me for it. You could take all questions and concerns and complaints to Pia and Nick Gordon. And you can say Cody sent you. Yeah. Anything else that you guys want me to yap about the thing, or you guys ready to just get me out, or what?
No, I think that covered it. We'll definitely be announcing, when the auctions are up and running. I think we were gonna try to avoid doing Facebook, doing it on Facebook, but I don't know that that's gonna be a possibility because there's still some website stuff that I was in charge of orchestrating, and I don't know if we'll have something workable by then. So we'll see.
Gotcha. Oh, I got a couple more sponsors looking at it. Exotic Jungles / Iguana Grub, a sponsor. Thank you. And M&J Ecological sponsor.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I hit on the ones that I got in front of me. So if you're a sponsor, I know you're not on there, I apologize. We still appreciate you. But yeah, it will definitely, I mean, you know how these things are. They're fun. It's socializing. It's hanging out. Obviously, like the last couple Carpet Fests, everyone was very respectful. We didn't have any problems. We didn't have any issues. It would be nice to keep them going that way. I would think a lot of the people that are showing up, they want to be there. They're excited for that. I don't think anybody's messing stuff up or getting drunk and starting fights for these kind of events. Maybe some bigger events, but something like this, I think it's always pretty.
I don't know, man. If Travis was there, he might. He's a wild man.
All right.
He's just a maniac.
And we do have a few adjacent neighbors in our area, so up until 10 o'clock we could, I think we didn't have any problems with noise or anything before, but anybody who's listening to this, come into it with a not totally getting trashed and making a ruckus kind of mindset. So our neighbors,
keep it to a dull roar.
Yeah, keep it to a dull roar, so our neighbors, like us and continue to support us in our endeavors of building this reptile zoological facility, and don't try to, kick us out of where we are because they hate us because of all the noise and whatnot. But so far, so good. We're pretty good with everybody.
If we haven't had an issue yet, I think we're probably okay.
Yeah, I think so. With that being said, it's going to be a good time. Like I said before, if you're going, let us know online. You can get your tickets online, like Justin said, or pay at the door. I think it's $27 a person to get in, and all that is going towards everything that we're throwing the money at, virus research, conservation initiatives for cloud forest stuff. Everybody's aware of the Abronia Alliance, where we're kind of restructuring everything into the Cloud Forest Alliance, and we could elaborate on that more later. But it was something that I was supposed to touch on the last talk, but you guys can get me on anytime you want. You got to kind of pin me down. Pia basically told me, you got to go on tonight the other week. And I said, all right, that's how you pin me down. Just, all right, you're coming on. But yeah, so because Abronia are awesome and we love Abronia, but there's a lot of other awesome stuff.
Yeah, that whole area needs help.
Every bit of it, and everything's so cool. I mean, I just love cloud forest stuff. Every part of it, from the plants to all the reptiles and amphibians, just the entire, it's just such a niche climate. The cloud forest sort of with global warming and all that stuff, I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't believe in that, but I mean, just look at what's going on. It's like those are the first habitats to fall, and there are animals that are found in cloud forests that are just not found anywhere else and cannot survive anything else other than those kind of cooler, high elevation conditions. And when they get bulldozed for agricultural development, and then illegal collectors or whatever come in and take the rest of them, those areas are just gone forever, and you're never going to get them back. More regulations and more stuff regarding legal scientific collection of these animals is getting harder and harder for legitimate people to do work with these animals. And then a lot of these areas are too dangerous for anybody to really go in, but the locals to do anything. And even then, some of these areas are too dangerous for the locals to go in. And it's just, these are areas that are just going to be gone, and we're never, there are going to be species that are going to be extinct that we never even knew existed. And so Cloud Forest Alliance is going to kind of incorporate everything and get people in that are like not just passionate about abronia or passionate about the palm vipers that live there, but are into the plants and into the birds and into the mammals and everything else. And that's the kind of the whole point of Cloud Forest Alliance, is getting partners that are capable and qualified in those areas and actually do something more than just keep these animals in captivity, which there's a part of that that's important, but it's not the end all be all.
Ow. I can't even hear myself.
Was that like some music that you were putting down for my rant, like some epic, like passionate circus music for the rant?
That's the closing credits of the Oscars.
Nice, very good.
Or as Dave Chappelle would say, wrap it up.
Yep. All right. Well, I am done. With that. I'm gonna go eat my barbecue chicken sandwich. Thank you guys for having me on to yap for a little bit. Hopefully I didn't disappoint everybody that I probably disappointed. Like, I'll hear when I get off the phone, hey, you didn't say this, that, or the other. But that's why there's other people on the team that are there to fill in the gaps when I don't say something right.
It's all good, brother. We love it. We're glad you came on.
See you next month.
All right, guys. All right.
Thanks.
Enjoy your guys' interviews.
All right, man.
Bye.
All right. See ya.
Later.
Bye.
My eardrums.
Was it too loud? I tried to make it like fade in, and it just went too loud.
Boom.
So we could sit here and introduce Wyman and everything, but if they don't know who he is already, then what?
Yeah, that exactly. If you haven't listened to any number of herpetological podcasts and or interviews and the
one might
YouTubes,
say he's Doc Y, man.
The one, the only, Dr. Travis Wyman.
Well, thank you, gentlemen.
How were babies made?
Do I need a partner to make one?
So
Maybe.
Wood storks or like sandhill cranes. I mean,
definitely sandhill cranes and cabbage.
Yeah. And cabbage. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Patches of cabbage.
Hey, Billy's here too. Yeah. So this was kind of short notice. Like as we said at the beginning, we're sort of planning an episode about this RAPS organization, which you were a part of. If you want to touch on it a little bit, feel free. If you want to spare it all for whenever we make that episode happen within the next, hopefully 2 to 3 weeks.
I mean, I can
or even
touch on it quick, but it's so RAPS is the World Reptile Amphibian Preservation Society that myself, Pia, Steve Tillis, Justin Julander, Zach Loafman, Paul Bertolini, or Paul, getting confused with Cody. Paul Bertone. Paul. We'll just call it Paul. We're all involved in it's. We're partnered up with Pia and Cody through RPI, and we're working on sort of a marriage between the academic and the hobby side, or the intellectual and the hobby side, kind of bring it together, a little bit of the, the zoo side and the hobby side, looking at species level preservation and how to bring about better, husbandry, keeping, information spread through the hobby than just a lot of the ridiculousness that goes on in places.
Awesome.
Sort of funneling things into one place so that everyone can keep track of it, kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's, so it'll sort of be like an umbrella, and RPI will be under it, Abroni will be under it, or affiliated with it in those ways, and try to work that way. Hopefully get up to a size where we can offer, small grants to people who are working on projects or collaborations with other groups that are working preservation projects, and help bring the community together more. Because, you got kind of like the snake guys and the frog guys and the turtle guys. And,
right.
A lot of like the turtle guys, they've really got their acts together and a lot of this stuff. And
there's so few of them.
Yeah. But outside of the turtle groups, most reptile people don't know about the stuff that they do, and they do some really solid work. So, bringing groups together like that, getting those ideas that the turtle guys use to promote their preservation, their conservation stuff, and bringing it to, the lizard group, the snake group, or, grouping it together. Gopher tortoises obviously share habitat with indigo snakes. So if you can bring two groups together like that and they're working together, you can have twice the impact.
It's a no-brainer. Yeah. I am anxious to dive into that more whenever we make that happen. But so we had talked about possibly doing it this week, but we have Jake coming back this week. So it's going to be the three of us. But the week after that, maybe we can make something happen. I'll talk to Paul and see if we can orchestrate and get at least three of you in one place, which is kind of the sweet spot, because I feel like the more people you add, the less gets covered. So
yeah.
And we decided we wanted to do a THP, or we're going to do a Snakes and Stogies because of photos and videos and stuff.
I don't know. We can figure that out.
Sure.
But Wyman is always the one we go to when we have really stupid questions.
People don't realize this.
He answers them of his own volition. He'll listen.
That's what I was going to say.
And then
I legit look forward to hearing what I like to call the Wyman recap, because it takes any kind of like rhetorical questions we may have, or any kind of theories or hypotheses that we have, and then he'll send us links to the journals and then give us a summarized version, or an abstract, if you will, about what we were talking about, and then expand upon it. And I love it.
We have it like on cue. Like we'll say in an episode, maybe I'm sure Doc Wyman will send us something about it, and then like clockwork, a few days later, it's like, oh yeah, here's this.
Yeah. And I apologize. I've been somewhat slacking on that because I usually listen at work. And about 2 months ago, they did an update to our system, and they completely borked YouTube.
That stinks.
It's back now. So I think I have to go all the way back to like episode 74, 75 and start listening from there. So you'll probably get bombarded by me in the next week or so with just a complete cascade of comments.
That episode where you were talking about X, Y, and Z that we forgot about.
Yeah, we probably don't. I literally probably won't even remember. I'm not going to lie.
Right.
I'll probably have an inkling, because a lot of the stuff we talk about, we've talked about at one point or another, but yeah, so he just listens to us while he makes clones of woolly mammoths and T-Rexes.
Yep, that's exactly what I'm doing.
That's what I like to think you do, man.
Yeah.
It's like maybe the sexy version. Wyman's in a lab cloning Kurt Cobain and Hendrix and all those great that were lost that we somehow have you know what it was? So, okay. We were driving to my father-in-law's yesterday, and for some reason, my child was rattling off facts about presidents, and we talked about George Washington. Apparently, his dentures that he wore are preserved somewhere, and I was like, we should totally get the DNA off those and bring back George Washington.
I don't know that the DNA from Washington's saliva will have been maintained over the time frame that we're talking about, simply because it's probably not stored in the best conditions for that.
Not
it's
to
in a little
mention,
box somewhere.
I'm pretty sure the teeth he had were not his.
They were not his, but
Yes.
I'm saying there was probably some blood or something, because I saw the picture of it. They were pretty medieval looking. I was like, surely there's some blood or something.
I mean, there could be.
Yeah.
And I agree with Clayton. He said if Kurt Cobain came back, he would instantly find himself with Courtney Love's shotgun in her hands. I am fully on board with that conspiracy theory, man. Like, Courtney Love, she's crazy enough to do it, dude. I don't know about y'all, but it seems completely plausible. So Phil has some questions, I hope. I definitely have some. And we shall.
I was going to say, first, congratulations on your very unique ball python.
I mean,
I'm not being sarcastic.
No, I know.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not.
Special ball, your fancy ball.
It's somewhat unique.
No.
And this usually happens a couple of times every season. You know.
Right, but I'll tell you, like, someone such as yourself who legitimately knows what's going on under the skin, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many people breed? Let's just use ball pythons because we're on the topic, and don't know that that's what happened. You know what I mean? Or maybe they haven't put two and two together per se. I'm an idiot. Enlighten me, please, because I was trying to read your caption that you put on Facebook.
There's a lot of big words.
And, well, not even a lot of big words, but I grasped the concept of it, and I thought that it's fascinating onto itself.
Heteroallelic.
I don't know if you want to give like a synopsis. Almost, you could probably just read your Facebook post for all I know, but I thought it was super interesting.
I mean, yeah, I can give a synopsis. So, this is my second clutch, and it was just bad to begin with. 6 eggs, 3 of them were slugs. One of them was veinless. The other 2 had veins. At about day 40, one of those 2 just crashed. I dissected it open to see what was going on, and there was an embryo that was basically just a head and organs, no body. And then the final egg went to day 70 and came out and was a single gene pied, which, just on the surface of it's like, well, that's cool. You've got a pied animal. And yes, but the male that I bred it to, he's a compound heterozygote. So that's when you have 2 different forms of incomplete dominant together. Mm-hmm. So, for ball pythons, I'm looking at the Jolt and the black pastel, which are in the same complex. So all of the babies would have to be either Jolt or black pastel. This animal was obviously neither of those. So the only way that could happen is through a parthenogenic event. And it's also female, which you see with the parthenogenics, because all indications are that the YY genotype is fatal across the board. So
like, statistically, that shouldn't have hatched?
I mean, again, we see parthenogenic clutches pop up a few times a season. Though, like Phil said, most people, they're like, I don't know how I got this. Well, this is how you get those kind of things. And there have been cases where I hop in and I explain it, and people are like, oh, cool, I didn't know. There have been places where I've hopped in and explained it, and people have been like, listen, you need to shut up because you don't know what you're talking about, which is always entertaining.
Well, wait, for people who don't know, what are you a doctor of, and what is your day job?
I hold a doctorate in microbiology and molecular genomics, and my day job is doing genomics, whole genome sequencing, molecular
Being told
PCR.
you have no idea what you're talking about by
No
ball
idea
python guys.
whatsoever.
Look, man, I got a Punnett square on a cocktail napkin. I know what I'm talking about.
My smoker's
I talk with Warren Booth all the time, and for those of you who don't know him, Warren has studied this extensively. He's published on it in Science, Nature, PLOS, all over the place.
The people or the snakes?
The snakes.
Both are very much worthy of scientific.
Yes, no. Warren has studied parthenogenesis in snakes. He's probably one of the leading names in parthenogenesis in snakes. He's gotten to the point where he doesn't even accept samples from people anymore when they say, hey, I think I got parthenogenesis, because almost universally that's been what it is. And so he just, rather than have dozens of them a year, he's just like, yeah, you're probably right. It's probably parthenogenesis. And we're not going to keep testing it, because every time we test it, it shows up as that anyways.
So this is the ball python in question?
Yes. Just a normal low white piebald.
But again, nothing like the parents, right?
Nothing like the male parent.
Okay.
Like I said, so the male was a compound heteroallelic. So he should have been, the possibility would have been either a jolt pied if the male proved out to be het pied, or a black pastel pied. And everything in the black pastel complex, when it makes pied, is usually very high white. Mm-hmm. So the fact that this is a low white pied would abolish that idea, but also the very few of the jolt pieds that have been made don't look anything like this. And I've talked to a couple of people who've made them, and yeah, they all agreed that while this is a unique looking animal, it's definitely not a jolt pied. So
basically did you see the pair? Did you see copulation?
I saw copulation.
So basically, he just didn't get the job.
Locks. Yeah.
Okay.
Something weird happened.
And so what happens?
Locks, and it was the only male that she has seen.
Okay. So what happens when you breed that to something else? Like that's I'm dumb when it comes to ball pythons and morphs and things.
Well, genetically, this is just a normal pied.
Okay.
Now, whether or not I breed it is going to be a whole other matter, because Warren has also seen that the few times that he has bred parthenogenic animals, they generally have very bad clutches, and it is also generally very bad for the animals themselves. I think he lost 2 parthenogens that he took to breeding. One of them he got to go, and it produced the clutch, but it dropped eggs 7 days post-ovulation shed. Most of the eggs were just crap, because obviously they weren't even mature.
Yeah.
Right.
So most parthenogenic products are, they're not really fit for breeding. But, if I can find somebody who just wants a nice low white pied as a pet, then they'll be welcome to it. Very
cool. And it's funny, you mentioned earlier, you were saying that most of the parthenogenic stuff, the offspring are female. I believe there was I don't know if it was 2 zoos in London that had Komodo, 2 different Komodo clutches where all the eggs hatched out male. And I'm pretty sure they were all euthanized. So it's different between the different species. So boas, pythons, anacondas, the boid complex, those are XY chromosome for sex. So the females are XX, and that's what you get with the parthenogenic clutches, because the YY phenotype, or the YY genotype, has proven to be lethal. In higher snakes, colubrids, vipers, things like that, the sex chromosomes are different. You've got the ZW, and it's the females are ZW and the males are ZZ for their genotypes. And in those, when you get a parthenogenic event, it's almost always male clutches. The males are the parthenogens. Lizards are ZW, so you get the same thing with lizards. You tend to generate males that are parthenogens. Very cool. Yeah, there was a guy local to me. Excuse me. There was a guy local to me, and when I was a wee lad working at Underground Reptiles retail store as a rat boy. There was a guy that came in with a bucket full of Brazilian rainbow babies. And he's like, oh, my Brazilian rainbow just had babies. And I need you guys to look at them because I think they're all boys. And then he's like, we're popping them. And it's like, boy, 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 boy. It was a whole, literally a 5-gallon bucket full of them. And then he told us that he had the girl for 13 years and she'd never seen another snake. And we're like, yeah. And then
that
it
should have been all girls.
Yep. And he, as far as we know, he gave all the babies away to friends, like just gave them away as pets to friends. So like none of them ever made it for any kind of, DNA analysis or, we never had any information on them at all. So it would have been cool to get more facts out of it. But yeah.
I don't know that anybody has tried to just cycle without breeding. Warren did have an albino ball python parthenogen and bred her, and she threw a second parthenogenic clutch. And so yes, the parthenogenic animal then produced its own parthenogenic clutch, and those apparently were also kind of train wreck looking animals at the end of the day when they hatched. Very few of them hatched.
Wow.
And then Bill asked, could it be a sperm/egg combo that's causing issues?
In what way?
I don't know.
I'll wait for Bill to clarify.
Is that a at-home centrifuge?
No, that is my wife's sewing machine.
Oh.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine.
It's quite all right. Quite all right.
And then Dom asked for Partho, is there generally a stimulus for her to throw a clutch, or does it happen out of the blue?
It seems to happen out of the blue. Warren has a theory, and I don't really want to out him on it, so I'm not going to. But his theory would be consistent with parthenogenesis that we see in some other species. But yeah, it's... To all intents and purposes, it seems to be an out-of-the-blue thing. There may be mechanisms behind it, though. And I don't know if that's something he's looking into or if it's just a novel theory that he has.
And Bill said parthenotes need to continue the trend. Sperm introduction is screwing up the system. ?
No, I mean, in theory, they should be just as normally viable as any other animal. They should breed like normal if they didn't have the problems that they have by being, essentially genetically inbred to themselves.
Mm-hmm. So my main thing is like palmetto corns are a good example. Like that was found in someone's backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And so anomalies like those, obviously they're rare, but I would think because of like how, I guess it could be completely random, right? But I would also assume that in a given population there would have to be enough mixing going on or inbreeding going on for something like that to pop up. I don't know if you have any insight into, how or why those are so rare, but they still. Because I also thought about like the leucistic kings that they tend to find in that one part of Southeast Asia where they continue to sort of. There's a population of them where every now and then they do find leucistic kings. It's not like there's just one.
Yeah. Usually you see mutations happen in a very localized population dependent manner. And it's because the gene is in that population. And while inbreeding in snakes in the wild is not a huge thing, there's still some degree of it because those populations tend to be fairly localized.
Right.
Really good example of that, gray banded kings, Alterna. Both the anery and the hypo are found in the Black Gap locality and nowhere else. And the Black Gap locality is very segregated off from the rest of those, the other localities. So when it came up there, obviously there's a finite number of snakes in that population. And while you're probably not getting brother to sister type breedings, the ones that are breeding, get the gene into the population. And so every now and then you get two of those animals that carry the allele together and pop out the visual mutation. Like I said, we see that in all kinds of different populations. Like decades ago, early in the ball python game, people would talk about how, there's one place where you can always find the pastels because that's just a little subset of the population where the pastel gene has occurred, and so it carries through. There's yellow belly populations. There's one place where they would always find the lavenders. So it tends to be just grouped in a population basis like that. Because once the mutation gets into the population, then it tends to stick around there to some extent, just traveling through because of the breedings.
I gotcha. Like they are mixing. It's just because it's a larger bowl.
Yeah,
where they're not. I gotcha. I just like you see stuff like that, and there was some pictures not that long ago, like an albino, black racer, and those random albinos pop up and stuff. It's like if we haven't seen that before, especially if it's a species that we come across regularly or something that's even in the hobby, it's like how long has that been floating around for that to happen?
It depends again on the size of the population. So a smaller population, you're going to see it happening more often. A larger population, it's going to become less and less likely to spin up, at least in terms of a recessive. In an incomplete dominant or a dominant, you'll see it at a higher frequency.
Very cool. Yeah, it goes back to that whole, we were talking about, piebald deer, piebald whitetail. And when Cox was chiming in and you see like particular herds on particular farms where, 1 out of 50 pops out pied. And then you have other groups where damn near the whole herd's pied. And it just goes to that, like, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm going to say, island group or isolated group, just like those black gap alterna.
Yeah, localized populations.
Populations.
The piebald deer, like when you see the large populations of them, the largest population of piebald deer is on a military base, and they're all trapped inside of that base perimeter. So obviously, you're basically just forcing inbreeding there.
Right.
When you see them out in the wild, and they tend to be less occurring, that's because you're getting a lot more admixture between normal deer that don't carry the piebald gene with them.
Very interesting. It's funny because there's actually a few individuals by me. One of the first ever, if not the first ever, leucistic cottonmouths was found in the canal system 10 minutes from my house. And I know a lot of guys that have caught several normal adults and just tried forcing the inbreed to try and get some kind of genetics out of it. And no one's been successful in that group of animals. So who the hell knows if it was just a fluke or what,
Yeah, and it could be a fluke. It could be a first generation occurrence type of thing. Although there have been a couple of different leucistic cottonmouths that have popped up over the years. So it seems like there's probably a small population of them that's floating around there, and they're just very infrequently coming together.
Right. Super
that kind of ties into the other question I had, is like when we talked about piebald deer. So with the pied thing in those deer, if you looked at it as far as the mutation itself, is it going to physically appear to be the same as if it were in like a snake? So like is a pied in the deer and a pied in a ball python really the same mutation, or are we just calling them that because they look the same? Like that's my thing. Like when you have anery corns and then anery
boas.
Boas. Good, yeah, right there.
So the answer to that is maybe.
Okay. That's something I've always I could never wrap my head around either. Is like, how do we know that it's actually anery because we call something else that looks like it anery? Right.
And in some cases, it's just similar phenotype but different genotype. In some cases, it's the same genotype causing the same phenotype, or the same gene, I should say, causing the same phenotype. So piebaldism, there are, depending on your model organism, so like mice, rats, dogs, bovids, horses, things like that we know, there are 3 to 6 genes that consistently produce a piebald mutation.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about piebald deer, there are actually 3 different phenotypes of piebaldism in deer. So there are probably 3 different genotypes. And if you look at those, on the genetic level, they're going to trace to 3 different genes. In what we see in pythons, you're probably going to see the same thing. One of the genotypes will probably correspond to the same gene that we see in ball pythons. One will be the same gene that we see in like berms or retics or something. When you look at the phenotypes of piebaldism that we see in the hobby, like for retics and berms, we have what's basically ventral dorsal piebaldism. So it starts on the belly and just comes straight up. With ball pythons, it's sort of both ventral dorsal and distal proximal. So it starts on the belly, but towards the tail and moves towards the head. So the piebaldism phenotype is differently in piebald ball pythons than it is in piebald Burmese pythons. So if you took a piebald berm and a piebald ball and bred them together, my suspicion is that you would get normal looking berm balls that were double het for 2 different kinds of piebaldism. The same way if you take 2 of the incompatible axanthics and ball pythons and breed them together.
Very interesting.
It's such a hard question to like explain to where it makes sense. Like albinism is a good example. So like there's albino people, there's albino rabbits, like there's albino.
We have albinism across the board, and that's because the gene for melanin, almost every organism, even going down to like some bacterial and fungal species, have melanin because melanin is a fantastic pigment for protection against the ultraviolet rays of the sun. Mm-hmm. So we all have a common ancestor along the evolutionary path that gave us the melanin gene. So we all carry the melanin gene, so any mutation that disrupts that melanin gene gives you an albino phenotype. Now, I've talked about it in the past. There's a whole pathway on how to make melanin. It's not just one gene. Mm-hmm. And like the very first gene in that pathway is for tyrosinase. So when we talk about amelanism, we're talking about tyrosinase negative mutations. It's a mutation that destroys that tyrosinase gene. Because if you break that gene, you can't even start the whole pathway to make melanin.
It's the gateway.
Right. It's the gateway. And knowing it's the gateway and knowing that all organisms, almost all organisms out there have got melanin in them, then you can understand if I break that tyrosinase gene in a human or a snake or a rabbit, they're all going to end up the same because that gateway gene is a gateway gene for all 3 of those organisms because they all have this same melanin pathway in them. And that's why you can take an albino berm and breed it to an albino ball and get albino berm balls because the gene is the same gene. It's that tyrosinase gene. Okay. Now, it may not be broken the same way in both of them, mm-hmm. but both of them are still broken. So you're getting 2 broken, you're getting 2 broken genes and it doesn't work the same way. Mm-hmm. Like, if I break all of the bolts on the right side of my driver's or of my car, my front tire, and if I shatter the rim on the left side, it's 2 different damages to the wheel, but the result is still that my car doesn't drive. Okay. So they're 2 different mutations, but they're still mutations of the same critical gene.
And that's after our episode with Dusty Rhodes. I had asked him about the hypo versus albino Baird's thing, because in the book he talked about how it's a T plus albino, which I asked you about, and you said that those more like using them interchangeably was acceptable. Am I recounting that correctly?
Yeah. I mean, I remember it like that, and that goes back. Just going back to cottonmouths real quick. Like, there's the whole Hypo Cottonmouth, which is proven out. It's not a hypo. It's just T negative. So, that gets into what's the word I'm looking for? Like community nomenclature.
Yeah, and that's the thing with the Bairds is, is it hypo or is it albino? You'd have to get a full genotype to know for sure. My suspicion is that it's a type of hypo. But everything in the hobby that we call, caramel albino, lavender albino, anything that isn't a true T negative albino, but we still call some kind of albino, technically those are all different types of hypomelanism. Because it's damage to a different gene in that melanin synthesis pathway. So they're producing some melanin, they're just not producing the full amount of melanin, and that's what hypo means. Hypo means less than, so it's less than the normal amount of melanin. So a caramel albino ball python isn't really a caramel, it's a hypomelanistic type. But, so is a lavender, so is a candy, so is a banana, so is an ultramel. So we have the different names for them to differentiate what they are, rather than, hypotype 1, hypotype 2, hypotype 3, hypotype 4, because then people really wouldn't understand.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it makes sense too.
Hypo is more hypopigmented than truly hypomelanistic.
Right, and that makes sense as to why your quote-unquote hypo has definitive patterns and a darker hue opposed to a straight-up albino, which is just going to be two base colors and minimal pattern.
But that's because that hypo still has some melanin, right? It's just not completely gone like it would be in like a T negative, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's not necessarily gone. It's
suppressed.
It's suppressed, so with melanin, you can have basically 3 different types of dysfunction. You can have dysfunction of production, which is in the chain of the pathway. Mm-hmm. You can have dysfunction of distribution. So it's made fine. It just doesn't get sent out to where it's supposed to go. And then you have dysfunction of deposition, where it's made fine, it's sent out fine, but then it doesn't stick where it's supposed to stick. So if you look at distribution and deposition dysfunctions, those can also be your T plus type mutations or your hypotype mutations, because the melanin, it's being produced, it's just not sticking around the way it should. So there's less melanin physically present in your animals.
And then Clayton had a question. Are there critical genes that contribute to piebald, and does mutation of color mean a mutation of melanin?
I don't know. There are specific genes that give rise to piebald phenotypes. So I'm not going to say this is an absolute, but if I were trying to find out which gene was responsible for piebaldism in pythons, I would look at 6 specific genes first before I started looking across the whole genome for just something random.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know that when we say critical in the genomics world, that means a gene that if you delete it, the animal dies. It's a critical gene. It's a necessary
survival
gene.
Critical,
right.
Not, yeah.
So I'm thinking he just means critical to the piebald mutation. And yeah, there are a handful of genes that give rise to that. So yeah, that would be what I would look at. As far as are all pigment mutations, melanin mutations, no, because snakes have got more than one type of pigmentation to them. They have melanin, and they also have xanthan or erythrin, which fundamentally are both the same thing at their starting point. It's just how they're processed that causes them to split up into either the red pathway or the yellow pathway. So you have those as other, pigments. And then you also have, they aren't true pigment cells, but they contribute to pigmentation of an animal, iridophores. It's not a pigment, it's a guanidine crystal structure. And so the way those crystals are laid down in thick or thin layers and the angles that they're laid out, they basically act as prisms. So they can absorb or deflect light at certain wavelengths and give rise to different colors.
And then I'm assuming that plays a key factor in the iridescence that we see in a lot of species.
It can be in the iridescence, but it's also in like your non-standard type colors that green. You don't look at green and think, well, yes, melanin is going to give me green.
Right.
Erythrin is going to give me green. It's the way those crystal structures lay down. They bend the light that comes in and gets reflected back out so that it's actually blue shifted, and then it's the blue shifted against a yellow layer background, so you're getting a blue and yellow together to make it look green.
Botswana Paul did a really good article on skin color and like that very thing in the not the latest issue, but the issue before last, I believe.
So that was May, right?
2 issues ago. Yeah. Because he also did one on Partho, and I'm curious. I'll have to ask Warren to give that a look and see what he thinks. But Botswana Paul, man, he freaking kills it. So it's my boy in Botswana.
Super fascinating stuff, man.
And then it's a lot of questions tonight. I like it.
Yeah, it's good.
Mutant
I'm having
geckos.
trouble keeping up with the YouTube questions and you guys at the same time.
Yeah.
So, Mutant geckos asked, and I'll just repeat the question so people listening after the fact can understand what we're getting into. They said, in leopard geckos, we have 3 snows. The max snow is incomplete dominant, and the tug and gem snow are dominant. Max creates supers, tugs and gems don't when bred to each other, but when bred to max they do. Why does that happen? Would that just mean that the super is just dominant?
I'm not super sure because I think there's probably more to this than what I'm reading. I'm also not super familiar with leopard genetics terminology because a snow to me is an albino anery compound.
Oh, but they say the max snow is incomplete dominant.
So Mac is incomplete dominant. Tug and gem are not. They're simple dominant. When you breed tug and gem to each other, you don't get a super, but when you breed a Mac to a tug, you get a super? That would imply that if I'm understanding it, that would imply that all 3 of these genes are alleles of one another. So what you're probably seeing is something along the lines of like the leucistic ball pythons, where, like a butter and a lesser are all white, but when you breed them to something like a special, you get a not all white type of thing. Obviously, it's not a perfect analogy because a lesser by itself isn't an all white.
Right, but we get what you're trying to say.
Yeah, but the same general thing. You've got alleles that are stronger and alleles that are weaker. So the tug and the gem would be the stronger alleles, and the Mac would be the weaker allele. So the Mac is going to behave. They're all really incomplete dominant to an extent, but the phenotype is so extreme in the tug and the gem that it looks the same in the homozygous it does in the heterozygous. It's different in the Mac because it's less extreme in the single gene versus the double gene form.
Yeah.
What's the difference between when you have blue-eyed and black-eyed leucistic? What is there a major difference there? What's the
It has to. So the leucism genes are a pigment disruption
okay?
type mutation. The black and blue are different types of pigment disruption. Both of them are affecting how, like I said, melanin,
Okay.
but all pigments are being distributed. And the way melanin is critical for eye formation, it's laid down in a different manner than how it's distributed through the body.
Mm-hmm.
So the mutations in the blue eye group are giving a normal layer of melanin at the basal membrane of the eyes during formation. So you get that blue structure where the first layer of melanin pigmentation causes the eyes to form, and they form blue because the rest of the pigment doesn't come in to them properly. With the black ones, the melanin layer is distributed atypically. It still is distributed properly for eye formation, but then it also just kind of overloads the pigmentation of the eye.
Yeah.
Such that you get the black. There's melanin deposition into the eye in an atypic manner that gives you the black, coloration base.
Oh, that makes me wonder too. Is that going to be something similar? Is like when you see every now and then you see gargoyle geckos with really dark eyes. I think they phantoms is what I think they call them. I don't know if there's anything actually to it, but you do get some gargoyles that have just those dark black marble eyes.
Yeah, and I'm sure that has something to do with the eclipse and the leopards too.
Yeah, it's probably functional in the eclipse of the leopards, although I don't know about the gargs. If they're just dealing with like dark gargs, what you could be looking at is like a melanization type of thing.
Right.
So the same thing we see in black pastel or mahogany ball pythons, where you're just upping the expression of melanin in the animals, and it's across the whole body. And part of that is also just increased melanin deposition in.
Yeah. And if you were to, obviously we're not going to do this because it'd be cruel, but if you were to blast that eyeball with light so that we could physically see it, you would still see the patterning and the colors and the physical pigmentation of the eye, but because it's so dark, it almost gives the appearance of just being monocolored, dark, black, whatever.
Right.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, the whole leucistic thing always got me, like in terms of just no pattern and no, for lack of a better word, no color. Like, but yet you still have particular melanin in the eye or in the heat pits if it has them or what have you. And then the random scalation that's just like a random black dot, a random brown dot, what it is. That always was fascinating.
Yeah, so this is like a good example. So gargs typically have this really bright colored eye. Like that's one of the things I like about them the most is like those eyes really stand out, but then you get these ones with the darker black eyes.
Which is interesting because the first two geckos you showed, the one with the lighter eyes has a darker overall color.
Well, they fire up and down, so that one could just be like that one. The one on the left there doesn't look fired up. The one on the right definitely does.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's interesting.
Billy Hum wants to know, how do polygenic traits work from a genetic standpoint?
Pretty broad question, isn't it?
I mean, it is a broad question, but we can deal with broad questions. Broad questions are good.
I feel like it's pretty late at night to be pushing you with these questions.
This is like how my brain works all the time. Have you ever seen the movie A Beautiful Mind?
I did, but a very long time ago.
Okay, well,
there's Russell Crowe, right?
Yeah. My mother saw it and she told me, she's like, "Oh, I saw this movie and it reminds me of you." And at the time, I was horribly offended because, he's a paranoid schizophrenic, and I'm like, "Thanks, Mom. I really appreciate this." But then I saw the movie and like they show him whenever like he looks out a window and he sees guys playing football, and like he like the equations for how the ball is moving and how gravity's affecting it and how the players are moving and everything, all of that, it's like what's running through his mind. And that's what my mother was getting at, because I mean that's kind of how I work, is I just kind of see the world in terms of genes and genetics. And
I mean, you'd rather that than what's eating Gilbert Grape. So
yes. So early, late, it doesn't matter. My brain just always thinks in terms of genomics. No, I'm not going to skip your question, Billy. So the way polygenetics works, it means you've got multiple genes plugging together to give rise to a phenotype. So tigers and carpet pythons is a really good example. There are very obviously multiple genes that help generate that striped dorsal patterning. Some of them are very strong and very probably dominant or incomplete dominant in their expression. Some of them are not as strong or are recessive. If you only have one or two of those genes, you get animals that are just partially striped or not very prominently striped. The ones that have multiples of those genes have really strong, bold, dominant, full-length stripes. So if we just randomly say that there are like 6 genes that contribute to it, and you need to have 3 of them as dominant or incomplete dominant and the other 3 are recessive, if you have homozygous for all 6, you're going to have a perfect tiger animal. If you have homo or heterozygous for the dominants, but all heterozygous for the recessives, you're not going to have a super clean, super striped looking tiger. You're going to have a tiger that's got, 2/3 of its length and then the rest of it's broken up, or the back isn't going to be as tightly striped or as prominent as you would see when it's a full combination of all 6 genes.
That's awesome. That's fascinating. That actually explains a lot. Like you said, using the tiger, that's a great animal to, because most of us who are into like the Morelia world or just into morphs and stuff, like you visually can see what you just articulated.
Yeah,
I think that was a great choice to use.
And I mean, it's one of the ones that's really easy to see in the hobby is
right.
Like I said, tiger. But you can see it in other species. I mean, it's what you do when you do selective breeding. I mean, anything that you do where you're selectively breeding, you're choosing for a group of genes that contribute to a trait. So, I mean, jungle carpets are the same way. The wild jungle carpets, they're not yellow and black.
Right.
It's just the way it is. There are a subset of genes that contribute to that really bright yellow and those really dark blacks, and you need to get all of them together to get that jet black with highlighter yellow combination. If you don't have all of those genes in there together, then you've just got muddy looking jungles. Now, those we call them muddy looking jungles. What it is you have a wild type jungle, not a selectively bred jungle.
Yeah, or even more so, a wild type from a particular locality based phenotype.
Right.
Yeah, like Casey and I were just, or Billy and Justin too, we were just talking about somebody was showing off some southern Queensland jungles, and they are straight up look like caramel, like the caramel morph. Yeah. And it's like, no, that's just how they came out. That's just how they look. And maybe that's indicative of a small island population that happens to have a caramel-like gene. But our jungles don't look like anything on that whole coast. So.
Well, that's what I was explaining to Jake, because Jake was over the other day and he saw the Loma Alta bears. And he was like, man, those are super nice. And he's like, that's what they look like in the wild. And I was like, not, I'm like, yes and no. Like, there are some that are really nice looking, but Like these are selectively bred to be like the jungles. Like this is the best of the best in terms of like line breeding and like, so yeah, they're Loma Altas, but if you went to Loma Alta, I highly doubt you'd find some that were that good looking. Like they'd still look good, but
yeah. It's almost always, whenever you're breeding for anything, again, Alterna is another good subset of it. When you were talking with, I think it was when you were talking with Dusty,
mm-hmm.
And he was talking about the different gaps, or maybe it was with Brian. He was talking about the different localities and how, like, if you actually went out to those localities and caught the animals out there, and then compared like the snake that you just caught that night to the population of gaps or
Mm-hmm.
Sandersons or whatever, the one that you just pulled out of the wild is not going to look anything like these locality ones that
Right.
you have been breeding for years and years and years in captivity, because you've been doing inadvertently selective breeding for specific traits for each locality in captivity. So you've purged out some of the.
And Marcus piped up about Lampropeltis nigrita. With the golden red specks under the belly, would that just be more or less the genes as well?
I don't know of anybody that has worked at it, but I'm sure that, yeah, if you bred for nigritas that had more red than yellow or more yellow than red, you could eventually isolate it down to getting an animal that was a solid red belly or a solid yellow belly. It would be the same type of thing. You're selecting for the genes or the alleles that express more one way or more the other way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting too. It just since we're talking West Texas, like I just got those subocs for my girlfriend and I, and they're supposed to be Davis County locality, and Justin and Rob Stone and a couple other cats have told me that they look like Davis County locality, except the guy I got them from told me that they're supposed to be het for silver, which according to Rob is not from anywhere near Davis County.
Yeah, it's not a gene related to any of the Davis County stuff.
Right. So either the person that I got them from was incorrect, or they've totally been mudded, if you will, and just happened to retain the Davis look. So, I mean, either still, we love them, but we'll see what happens in a couple of years.
That's when the lines get blurred. When you get into the localities.
Blurred happens.
All right. Can I jump back to a Partho question?
You can jump back to a Partho question.
So
we will allow it.
The one of my favorite lizards, the Lepidophyma from Costa Rica, the night lizards or T-Rex lizards, if you want to call them that. Mm-hmm. There's the particular Costa Rican locality that is entirely female in the wild, and when they do produce offspring, it's Partho, and supposedly they're exact clones of mom, and it usually has a litter of 2 to 5 babies, and they're exact DNA clones of mom.
Are they exact DNA clones, or are they half clones?
That's what I was going to ask, because there's no males in the wild. Either they've been extirpated or whatever.
So they're probably half clones. Now, depending on how long the population has been producing at a parthenogenic level, they're essentially full clones, simply because all of the females are all copies of each other and they all have the same genome. So it's just getting repeated over and over and over again.
Right.
And we see that with like some of the parthenogenic whiptails.
Okay.
Those are somewhat stable populations, and the females continue to make copies of themselves. And it's not just this random, like it is with, the ball pythons or the Chihuahua geckos when they pop them out. It's not just this random occurrence where it is a true spontaneous parthenogenic event where it's a true parthenogenic population. And they tend to then be all just, genetic clones of one another. But even in those situations, you can get genetic mixing, like mourning geckos. And I was talking about with Bill about this in chat. We see this. Mourning geckos are thought of as a pure parthenogenic all-female species, but they do randomly produce males. And in those males, they do get some genetic shuffling. So the males then can breed with females to give a boost to genetic diversity in the population if it's necessary. And most of the studying around this has been done in things like Daphnia and aphids. So how well it applies to reptiles is somewhat in debate, but it's still fairly consistent with what we see is, when you have a static genetic population, if a disease breaks out, then everybody's going to be susceptible to it. This is why we see problems with bananas and all the monoculture that we have in our farming type of stuff. They're all the same thing. So a fungus breaks out and now entire banana fields all fall over dead because they're all the same plant, so none of them are resistant. If an outbreak of some disease starts ripping through a population and they're all genetically identical, then they're all going to be susceptible to it. But if you have the ability to produce these random males that can shuffle up your genetics, you have the possibility then of creating offspring that are somewhat genetically diverse and may hopefully have that resistance to the disease or to the changing climate environment or whatever. And then when things stabilize back down, that infrequent male popping up just kind of sort of fades into the woodwork. It's still there, but the females just continue to produce, and you get that stable then parthenogenic population again.
Has there been any study, whether it be with the aphids or the mourning or whatever, where you had a random male occurrence, the male copulated with one or more partners, and then those offspring, was there an abundance of males produced from that or no?
I don't know about an abundance of males. In some situations, the males, the
surplus.
It's a 50-50 type of thing, the way you would normally expect with a male-female breeding. In some situations, the males donate, shuffled genetic packaging, but the females still produce all females out of the clutch, which then go on to produce parthenogenically, but
right, there's
different genetic payload. So
right,
you end up with a dozen different females that are parthenogenic and continue to reproduce parthenogenically, but they're all genetically distinct from one another. So hopefully, one of those 6 then is resistant to whatever the change in the population stressor is.
Very cool. Very cool.
So Mutant Geckos had a question that also sort of ties into what my next question was going to be. And they said, I hatched out a perfect stripe on a hardwick eye, so the Indian leopard geckos, hardwicky. They always hatch out banded, no line breeding, just a random mutation. Will this be an easy thing to line breed now, or can a perfect stripe just happen on one time only and never again? Which ties into my question of, if I recall, I remember hearing about corns that they would, maybe it wasn't corns, maybe it was some kind of king, but they would hatch out with stripes, but they weren't from striped snakes. It was like some sort of temperature, I guess, malfunction or something, where the genes, for whatever reason, it changed things.
Yeah.
And so my question with that is, if it's there, but how can it be there but not be inheritable?
Okay. Well, let me first answer in the specifics of what Mutant Gecko asked, and then I'll take it more broadly to what you're asking. So with the Hartwickie, I would say the first thing you have to do is breed them out. If you've got these perfectly striped animals, breed them out. If you breed them out to something unrelated and they all go bandids, and then you breed those back together and you produce stripes, then you're probably looking at something genetic, whether it's polygenetic or Mendelian will show up depending on how, ratios pop out backwards and stuff. So that's kind of you have to test it to prove it type of thing. It could just be the fact that, you had a handful of these random genes and you just managed to perfectly pair up the two right animals to bring them together. Or it could be a spontaneous thing. Or it could be then going into Justin's question of, a temperature dependent phenotypic alteration, which, it's not really a mutation because you haven't changed the DNA. And the best way to think of that, let me come up with a good analogy here.
I imagine if, let's say it was temperature, just to say it was temperature, would it be something almost like fetal alcohol syndrome, where like something during gestation caused a birth defect, for lack of a better word, i.e. it made stripes?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
It's not the greatest analogy, but we'll roll with it.
Okay.
We'll bring snakes and bakes together here.
Cool.
DNA is your recipe. So if I grab my recipe book and I pull it down and I open it up and I follow that recipe, I should get the same thing every single time. Now, if I write out my recipe and I put it down and it works perfectly for me and I stick it in my oven and out pop my cookies after 8 minutes and everything's perfect. And then I go to my parents' house and I follow the exact same recipe and I pop it in their oven and I pull it out after 8 minutes and I've got little charcoal briquettes because their oven isn't calibrated the same as my oven. So I followed the recipe exactly the same way. So the DNA was all the same way, but it was an outside influence. It was that, the fact that the ovens were working differently that caused the outcome to be different. So, if you think about it in a more physiological manner, when you bump up the temperature on cells, they tend to move a little bit faster. And so some of the processes are going to go faster, which means like if you have two genetic pathways that are happening and they basically act as checkpoints for one another, and if one of them is slightly temperature dependent, so if you bump the temperature up, it happens faster than the second one, then where they would normally intersect to happen and cause the normal thing to happen, if this one blows past before this one can come and intersect it, then they don't stop each other where they're supposed to. They trip over each other much later, and so your phenotype gets changed.
They're not in sync.
Right. You lose the synchronization on it.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, but almost just to dumb it down even more, going back to baking, like if I set the oven for 350, it's still going to have, if my mom's oven gets to 350 faster than my oven, that would be a difference. And it was still cooking at 350 for exactly at the same amount of time, but because my mom's oven got faster, heated up faster than mine, it caused a reaction.
Right. Or, if the seal on your oven isn't as good, they're both at 350, but yours has to keep cycling more and kicking on more frequently, which is actually causing little spikes that are higher than 350 to give that even 350. It's going to cause differences.
Yeah, you could compare that to an incubator where you have, your thermostat is not set appropriately, and instead of it fluctuating fractions of a degree or a whole degree, it's fluctuating 3 to 4 degrees before it gets back up to temp or lowers that to temp. Yeah,
spike and the drop, and then the spike and then the drop versus doing,
correct,
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's something you just don't. I just remember reading about that, like a billion years ago. And that was kind of the last I'd heard about it. Like I don't really hear about temperature related sort of changes in phenotype like I used to.
I mean, you'll still hear about it sometimes. It's just with a lot of things like that, it's become, for lack of a better term, part of the collective memory of the herp community. So when it happens, it is just kind of like, oh yeah, we've seen this before, and then it gets dropped.
Yeah.
With ball pythons, you used to get what they called the jungle phenotype or the jaguar phenotype, where they had this like really weird melty look to them, and they would just happen randomly, and then people noticed that it would be because there was a temperature spike, and after years of thinking, oh yeah, it's just it's an incubation issue. It's an incubation issue. Now when they pop up, somebody's like, oh hey, I just hatched out this thing. Could it be a new mutation? And somebody's like, no, that's a jaguar mutation, or that's the jaguar phenotype or the jungle phenotype. We see that with incubation issues, and then the conversation immediately dies.
Now, does temperature would it affect heritable traits like that though? Like if you had something at a higher than sort of average, like maybe a step above that. So like if I'm cooking something at like 82 and slightly higher would be like 83. If you're talking about something that's at like 84 or 85, would that have any bearing on those traits and how they would be worked?
On like an already existing trait?
Yeah, just if you happen to have something incubating warmer than normal, does that is there any way that would affect actual like the genetic ziplocking or zippering of things and change that phenotype? It
could. Again, if you're dealing with a mutation to something that kind of involves a checkpoint or a pathway that's in some kind of time-dependent manner, and you start pushing the clock a little faster in one way or another, it could exacerbate, or depending on the condition, maybe depress the expression of the pre-existing phenotype.
I feel like it also would be species and even locality of species specific, because there's so many species of egg-laying reptiles where the nest or the clutch or the spot of dirt where the eggs are buried is going to spike randomly throughout the entire cycle. You know what I mean? So I would imagine certain species, it's irrelevant, while as other ones, it would possibly produce one of those, for lack of a better word, mutations.
Yeah, and you can see that. It's not. Usually, it's not a matter of, oh my God, it changed by a degree, and so everything's going to come out looking all weird. I mean, that's part of the reason you just see phenotypic variability across the board is, small changes in expression of genes, whether high or low, faster, slower type of thing. That's why all ball pythons, all carpet pythons, all Bairds, all corns don't have the exact same pattern, exact same color across the board, even though they have the exact same genetics. Small little fluctuations will cause the genes to be turned on. A gene isn't like an on-off switch. It's kind of like a dimmer, or like your hot water faucet, where you turn it a little bit. If I turn my hot water faucet to the middle, I'm getting hot water. I'm just not getting all hot water. If I turn it all the way, I'm getting all hot water. Well, if I have a gene that regulates how that faucet gets turned on, and that faucet is a second gene, then the expression of the first gene depends on how the second gene works. The expression of something else affects the first gene. So you've got a whole combination that's turning things up and down at different rates. And each of those is getting turned at a different rate. The way I turn on my faucet here is different than the way my daughter turns on my faucet. It's different the way that my wife turns on the faucet. We're all turning on the same faucet.
Yeah, that's like what Kevin said, where in leopards, the brightest geckos come out at 90 degrees. It doesn't mean I can't make a bright one at 83 or 84.
Right.
Yeah. So Henry just texted me with an interesting question. He says he comes from the dog world, and no offense to anyone, he's always found reptile breeding to be kind of primitive, similar to the way dog breeding compares to horse breeding. And his reason for saying that is, everyone breeds for color, blah, blah, blah. Is it possible to breed for specific traits, length, girth, venom yield, and or some of these traits dependent on environmental circumstances?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
I mean, we know that like size can be dependent on environmental circumstances. When we just look at, the native environment, we look at things like dwarf and super dwarf retics and birds. In
Right.
the insular population, we tend to get those dwarf species. That's an environmental thing. In some cases, it's only environmental in as much as there's not enough food, and so the animals are stunted. But in some cases, it's been going on long enough through geologic time that the animals have evolved to be smaller to fit their environment. People think super dwarfs are all going to be the size of corn snakes, which is ridiculous. But
Yeah.
you take a true, just straight out of the wild super dwarf, even if you feed the ever-loving hell out of it, is it going to get big? Yes. Is it going to get mainland big? No. Because it's had that geologic time to have the genotype changed. Can you breed for traits, to do that? Of course you can. You can breed for, if you take your biggest animals and you breed them together, and then take the biggest offspring from that and breed them together, and take the biggest offspring from that and breed them together, you get bigger animals over time.
Yeah.
The same goes for the opposite. I mean, Garrett Hartle has shown that. He's got animals that are 80% mainland, but they're still the size of super dwarfs because he's done I bred a mainland to a dwarf, and I kept the smallest animals and bred them to smaller animals, and kept the smallest from that and bred those back to smaller animals. And so he has pushed for the small phenotype through, it's the same selective breeding like with tigers in carpets, except instead of looking at a pattern phenotype, he's looking at a full body phenotype.
Yeah.
With venom, I would say yes, you could do it. I more think of it in the opposite way. So I had this conversation with somebody once upon a time, could you ever breed for, say, a non-venomous cobra? And sure, you could. You could take cobras and breed them and take the babies and, throw a rat in and find the baby where when it bites the rat, it takes the rat 2 minutes to die instead of a minute.
Right.
And then, all those babies where it takes 2 minutes and breed those together and throw in rats, and then find the ones where it takes 5 minutes.
Right.
10
Whittle
minutes,
it down.
and then
Yeah.
20 minutes, and then you whittle it down and whittle it down and whittle it down.
Yeah.
And then, you could go even further than that because, they're still producing venom. Well, then, look at, physiologically the ones that not only are they producing less lethal venom, but their teeth are smaller or their venom glands are smaller.
Right.
And, keep selecting for those ones. And you eventually could end up with a non-venomous cobra.
You could, and I imagine you could do it in the same regard in the opposite, where if
you could do it in the same regard in the opposite.
Yeah, where if you're going for a higher yield because you're running a lab and you have venom production for pharmaceutical research or what have you, and you have a bunch of diamondbacks that all produce 10 cc's, and you got one that produces 15 or 20 cc's, so you breed that and you just keep making it more and more and more and more, and before you know it, you got. Yeah,
at 15 year to somebody, and then you raise those up and you find the ones that are consistently giving 15, and you breed those together. Yeah. You pull the ones out of there that only make 20s or 30s. Yeah,
sure.
You can do that kind of thing. And you can do it for behaviors too. So the Novosibirsk, I think it is, it's a Russian institute. They've done behavioral studies in animals and domestication. They took foxes and they bred them together, and they would go into the pens and get the kits, and the kits that started running over to them, those are the ones that they kept, and they and over just a handful of generations, they started seeing behavioral changes to basically domestication like you would see in dogs.
Yeah.
They're more likely to wag their tails, they get the floppier ears, they start getting more playful, but they also did it the opposite direction at the same time. The kits that were like aggressive, they segregated those and only bred them together. And now they've got a whole population of foxes that are, as soon as you open the door, they all come running over to you like a bunch of frantic puppies. But then they've got another group where you open the door and you better be in full body protection because they're just going to come straight at you and try to maul you.
Is there anything more Russian?
That's true.
Yes, there is. The same place that did that with foxes, they did it with rats too. And if you open the cage on the vicious rats, you have to be wearing like a chainmail gauntlet because the rats just come and attack your hand.
Wow.
That's more Russian going for crazy foxes.
That is true. I like that.
It's like, why? Well, we went one way. We wanted to see if we could go the other too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
pretty much.
That's gnarly.
What's the selectively breeding to produce a mutation out of nothing?
So I'm currently in an argument with some subsection of the hobby that you would think that this subsection of the hobby, which is known for its almost anal retentive obsessive compulsiveness for purity of localities and phenotypes, and somebody popped out randomly an albino, and it is known that about 30 years ago or so, it was hybridized to put the albino gene into this species, and someone is arguing that no, it didn't come from that, well-documented hybridization event. What this is it's intentional selection over time to make these albino animals from
Are we at liberty to say what species?
Alterna.
Okay. Fair enough.
I didn't really want to name names, but I guess I can name the species.
Yeah,
So,
we'll name the species.
Back in the early 90s, Alterna were hybridized with Ruthii, an albino Ruthii, and then those have been back crossed, and like by 98 they had them at like, I want to say 12% Ruthii blood, so they looked very, very much Alterna-like.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact that they're still albino Ruthii or Alterna Ruthii hybrids,
Yeah.
And so somebody popped out albinos, and there are a whole bunch of people saying that the reason this guy got albinos is because he selectively and carefully bred over time to create an albino phenotype. And I'm like, no, dude, he is breeding a bunch of generic Alterna together, and somewhere in those generic Alterna
was something from that stock.
Or something that has that Ruthii stock in it, and it's just the albino gene from the Ruthii finally coming into play.
And let me guess, that person doesn't have video documentation of them at Black Gap picking it up off the cut.
No, and it's not the person who produced them that's arguing that.
Of course, it's not.
It's just some other guy who's convinced that this isn't Ruthii. This guy put a lot of work into his things, and he managed to create new albinos out of.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that ties into something that me and Phil have talked about like Carpondros and stuff. Like, if you do that, can you breed out 2-0 that
you can't,
that half of the hybrid? Or if it's like a 75% chondro, 25% carpet.
Well, I mean, Burke said it best, is that, if you have a glass of water and you have a cup of coffee and you take a drop of coffee and put it into or you pour half the cup of coffee in there and you have all this, and then you slowly take some out and add water, and slowly take some out and add water, and slowly take some out and add water, you still have remnants of coffee in that cup forever.
Okay. Yes and no.
Okay.
So by analogy,
I may have butchered the analogy from Burke. My apologies.
By analogy, he is right.
Okay.
This is the half-life principle.
Sure.
No matter how many times you divide it, you still have half of 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 half.
Right.
And in the absolute sense of it, when you think of it that way, yes. That said, yes and no. It depends on how you're outbreeding back. So you can think of it like if I have bred these carpondros together,
Mm-hmm.
and then I breed.
You're talking about you've bred a chondro to a carpet. You've produced an F1.
You have 50-50s.
Right. Okay.
50-50. Now, if I take those 50-50s and breed them back together, technically, the offspring that I get from that are also 50-50s.
Right.
Okay. But if you look at them on the genetic level, you're going to have a bell curve of distribution of the genes.
Mm-hmm.
And on the extreme ends, there is a possibility. Now, in the first generation, it's a very low possibility, but it's still a possibility of getting pure carpet and pure chondro back. So
Okay.
if I take the most carpet looking and the most chondro looking of those babies and then breed them only to each other. So if I take two of these mostly chondro looking ones or two of these mostly carpet looking ones and breed them back together, then my bell curve is going to be shifted where most of them look more carpet with a little bit of chondro looking one. So if I keep pushing towards those extremes, there is a point where you could purge all of the chondro genetics by pushing one way or all of the carpet genetics by pushing the other way.
Okay.
If you are just doing the half of half of half of half of halfway, depending on how closely related the organisms are, you get to a point where it's kind of like it's essentially moot because the genes, any gene that may have come from the other is the same as the gene from the normal. So if you just
you're kind of just going back to zero.
Yeah.
Right, you're basically going back to zero. So if we think of these Alterna by Ruthvii hybrids, if I breed and I just constantly breed those back to Alterna to the point where I get to what would be an ancestral Alterna looking genetic stock, because the Alterna and the Ruthvii, maybe it really is the Ruthvii MHC gene or HOX3 gene, but those are identical between Ruthvii and Alterna anyways, that I have a pure Alterna. Now, then that could be considered a pure Alterna because you would not be able to differentiate them on the genetic level from the hybrid.
Okay.
But if it's something like, even if I have bred back to Alterna 100 times, if I still have that albino Ruthvii gene in there and it's popping up, then I can definitely say, no, that's still some kind of bastard animal because that gene is not present in the original wild type stock.
Right. But the theory that I, just using carpondros to make it simple, I have my 50-50 carpondro, and I take that 50-50 baby and I breed it to a fresh carpet, and then that offspring goes to another fresh carpet, and that offspring goes to another fresh carpet, and I keep doing this where I'm only taking the babies and regardless of what they look like, and I'm bringing them back to fresh carpet, to fresh carpet, to fresh carpet in 50, 60, 100 generations. In theory, it will still have chondro gene in it.
In theory, it will, yes.
Okay.
But again, if that chondro gene is indistinguishable code for code from the carpet gene,
right?
Because it's that it's in that ancestral area.
Yeah.
Then you kind of reached a point of, does it really matter?
Right, and that's what happened with this albino gray band.
Well, yes and no. I mean, obviously, it still has the albino gene in it.
Yeah.
So it does matter because I can say that never came from an Alterna.
Yeah.
If it was just, if I did not know any other ways, because all the other genes were ancestral genes that are the same between both species, then, it just looks like a generic Alterna. It doesn't look like a locality one. It's just a generic looking one. And in that case, you'd be like, oh, I don't know, it's just a generic alternative.
Yeah. Brilliant. Awesome.
Oh, my head feels heavier.
Dude, I love it. I love it. It's fantastic.
That's something every time I see Billy post a Carpondro his, that's what I think of, is like we having that conversation of, if I bred this back and back and back and back and back, could I essentially breed the one half of that out?
Yeah, but I don't know anybody that actually would, because the whole point is to make
who knows
hybrids.
Right, but you're also, I would only imagine that would take a very long time to boil down, at least in the span of like someone working within their lifetime. Something I'm sure could it even be done within a 60-year time span?
I guess
it depends on how hard you push it.
I think it also depends on if you how many individuals you have working on one project. You know what I mean? If you had the three of us were all attempting, all three of us started off with, 3 hybrids, and all three of us continued to, unmuddle the gene pool, and then eventually put them all back together. Would it still? It would then have more of the original gene, or would it have less?
Mm-hmm.
I don't
know. But how come, like, in terms of taxonomy and stuff, why is there no standard for them determining what makes something a separate species or subspecies? Like in science, the place of all like thresholds and standardized lines
and
like,
rules.
Why is there no baseline for these things? Like with Mexican bears, at one point it was talked about them being a separate thing, but I guess someone somewhere at one point did the deep digging and said they're not different enough, I guess, to be something else, but they are very clearly phenotypically different, and they are pretty isolated from the other stuff. Is it just like, how much of this stuff is basically someone just going and doing a quick look at these things and saying, yeah, I don't see anything, and then moving on and it never being brought up again?
All of it. Taxonomy papers are really, the taxonomy is determined by the whim of the person writing the paper. If you've got a person who's a splitter, then they'll come up with a justification for why everything needs to be different. If the person's a lumper, then they'll manage to find a way to make it so that everything is the same. There are very few exceptions to that. One of those exceptions, and I would say that it is what leads to probably a better taxonomic paper for it, would be Daniel Matouche.
Yeah.
He is a lumper. He is, by his own admission, a lumper.
Yeah. He said that on the ChondroCast. Yeah, he's like, I could have done way more with these, and I didn't.
Yeah, and he, even admitting that he's a lumper, he's like, I had to split these because there's no ifs, no ands, no buts. These are different. So when a lumper looks at something and says, these need to be split, then I feel a lot more comfortable being like, this
right.
makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Like if it's making that guy go, damn, it's...
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why we all reference him and his research, because the facts speak for themselves.
Yeah, he said it. He said it himself. He said, I could have probably split these even more if there's enough going on. He could have easily split it more, but he's like,
he had pushed for more data, that he could have, I think he said that he wanted more data to be able to tighten it up and firm it up to make it bulletproof, basically. But even without that, the fact that it's there in his head that, yeah, these are probably all different species, that speaks volumes, But, there are guys out there that just like to split things. I'm sure you could find somebody out there who would be more than happy to write a paper taking Alterna and turning it into 12 different species.
Sure.
Like they did with forest cobras.
Yeah. Well, the forest cobra thing is very similar to the king cobra thing, and Henry's going to yell at me for bringing this up, but you have people that believe that the data speaks for itself, whether it actually does or not. You have people that see the data and go, okay, it's not one species, it's 7 or 8 species, but you know what? Let's make it 15, because if they're their own species, we can make them protected and we can write laws and we can get our names in books and so on and so forth. So, yeah. Whole nother topic.
I'd imagine I don't know the actual details as far as the forest cobra thing, but I'd imagine it was from what I remember, it was something fairly similar to the chondro thing, where there was like a cryptic diversity, and someone finally decided to take the time to look into it.
Yeah, I know that there's been a lot of DNA-based, taxonomy in recent years, but it's almost crappy to look at how awesome the Touche is, because his sample size was gigantic.
Yeah, he put in a lot of footwork,
and so many people only use 20 specimens, 50 specimens, 100 specimens. I think Daniel said he had like 2,700 specimens or something like that.
It was several thousand.
Yeah, and like that in itself speaks volumes. So I mean, I know I won't deny the forest cobra thing. I'm sure that they are different species. I trust the guys that are way smarter than me. But some of them, like I can't tell a difference looking at them. It's like two chondros that don't have any kind of identifying marks. Like yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Your Highland types and stuff are all going to look pretty similar, and I mean, pretty much if you looked at it chondro wise, like they got split into like quadrants, like 4 quadrants. As far as the range. And I thought it was interesting too that he talked about, hybridization isn't really a thing with those, because I had asked him about that specifically, like how many did you find that were intergrades, and he pretty much said none, because the physical barriers. But then it was also something similar to like dart frogs and those populations in South America where you have multiple species together, but they're not integrating at all. Like there's no hybridization going on because they're in their own sort of pockets and areas.
Biome segregation. They may be in the exact same area, but some of them are on the ground, and some of them are 6 inches off the ground, and some of them are 2 feet off the ground. So even though they're all in the same geographic point, there's stratification vertically that they don't encounter each other.
Yeah, I was going to say that with the forest cobras, I remember that one of our Tanzanian exporters at Strictly back, 15 years ago, he sent us forest cobras and they were tan.
Yeah.
It was like, hey man, what are these things? He says, oh, these are forest cobras. We said, well, no, what happened to the black and yellow?
Right.
And he says, well, if you're east of Dar es Salaam, they're black and yellow. If you go west, they're brown and tan and taupe and beige.
I had a buddy up in Charleston who had some for a couple of years, and they were those, like, I called them the ugly ones because they weren't really anything to look at compared to, but he said they were also way more mellow than your typical forest cobra, like much more easier to work with. They weren't completely psychotic, and they look completely different.
Right. I mean, I could be wrong in my localities, but
his might have been South African though, I'm thinking, for some reason.
Yeah. So that just goes to another point. Like, so just talking about the Dar es Salaam animals, like they're the same species, but the phenotype's different. But at the same time, you go 100 miles south and now it's a different species.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know the full extent of it because, forests aren't my cup of tea per se, but yeah, it makes you think a lot. So.
But in your professional opinion, Doc, where would you, if someone said, hey, guess what, tomorrow you can tell us what the threshold's going to be for something being that species, subspecies barrier, where would you set that line?
Great question.
I don't know that you can, I don't think that there's any specific line that you can draw, because it's going to be different. It's going to be different for everything that you're looking at. I mean, nominally, there's less than 1% difference between us and chimpanzees.
Mm-hmm.
So if we start saying that it's less than 1% difference for everything, then, yeah, there are 30 different species rather than just alternate. There are 40 different species of rat snake instead of just the eastern gray rat. It's going to be different across the board. You got to consider different factors as to what really makes for a different species in terms of not just genetics. Does genetics play a large role? Yeah, I think it does. But, genetics and behavioral pattern and environmental pattern, all of these things come together. There are African cichlids. There's a red and a blue species. Genetically, they're basically identical. And they breed true only, reds will only mate with reds and blues will only mate with blues.
Okay.
Until you put them in pitch black and they can't tell the difference visually if
Really?
they're breeding with a red or a blue, then they just interbreed.
Interesting.
So they're basically genetically identical. The only difference is a small change in the pigmentation, which, to all intents and purposes, is just the difference between, an albino and a non-albino.
Right.
But the behavioral cue is there for the reds to only want to breed with the reds and the blues to only want to breed with the blues. So is that one species? Or is it two different species? Because even though they're genetically almost identical, there is a very specific behavioral pattern between them that prevents them from interbreeding in the wild.
Right, but now you're walking a fine line between subspecies and just, visual race. Right? Because if the DNA is the same, but they're different colors, you know what I mean? I mean, you look at like death adders in the wild that are different race colors, and they will typically only breed with their same race color despite being in the same niche environment. But if you had them in captivity and it's the right time of year, they'll quote unquote hybridize. I'm sure Iber's going to yell at me for saying that wrong, but
I know what you're saying.
But now at the same time, though, they're the same species. They're just different colors. So I don't know. But that cichlid thing is very interesting. Is it Melanin?
I can't remember the exact species.
Okay.
Fish nerds. It's a whole nother
Aquatic sea alcohol, man.
Talking about a separate species. Don't hybridize those.
So it's at the 2-hour mark here, aren't we?
Yeah, quarter after.
So real quick,
change.
I gotta ask real quick on our I don't want to say closing remarks, but how are the kukris?
They're doing well. They're very much attitude. But
I like it.
Little ones like everything that they see.
Nice.
Have you gotten them to eat another ball python shed since that first one?
I haven't, but I haven't actually tried.
Oh, okay. Seen a lot of bizarre things, but that was definitely up there, right up there with the sulcata swimming.
Bobbing, you mean?
Yeah. Things that just don't feel right.
Yeah.
Seeing a bird-side swim and watching a kukri eat a shed.
Super cool.
I remember seeing that picture doing like a double take, being like, "What the hell is that?" And I was like, "What?" What? Fun fact: I got the bears to eat some quail eggs.
Nice.
Like I offered it to the boiga and the female cyan. It was all about them. Offered them to the Jansenii, got no interest. One of the corns was starting to eat, and then when I opened the tub, decided to stop and not come back. And then I had at least two of the bears eat some quail eggs. So I thought that was kind of interesting because I don't know if many people have tried that with them.
Impressive.
Yes.
Well, Doc, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to throw in? I know we've kept you on spotlight the whole night.
The barrage.
You know, it's fun. This is the kind of thing that I enjoy doing. Yeah, no, I can't think of anything more to cover other than, you know, obviously, as Justin said, we'll try and get a more complete wraps episode together that, you know, is more than that 60-second whiplash that I gave on it. You know, get Pia and Paul in and have them explain it better to everybody and get people more interested because they're a bit more articulate on the matter than I am. But do check out Wraps. Do check out RPI. Definitely get down to Cody and Pia's for the party if you can make it. You know, take that extra day or two. Come down early. It'll be a good time.
It's very much worth it.
Yes.
Yeah, man. And for those of you going to look for the rap stuff, it's WRAPS, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, WRAPS.
No. But yeah, the party is going to be a good time for all. It's for a good cause all around. So, yeah, kick in and support it.
Yeah.
Support the hobby because it's, you know, one of the things we all talk about doing, and most of the people involved in this little herpetoculture network, NPR network, they're really good about that. But, you know, spread the word. You know, get it out to other people because other people find out about these things, and the more people we get involved, the bigger the footprint is that we cover, and the better it is for everybody all around.
Well put, sir. Well put.
Hell yeah, brother. All right. Well, where can people find you if they have more entry grade questions?
Facebook, Travis Wyman. I am not the motocross racer. Don't message the motocross racer because he's not going to be able to help you.
He's probably going to be very confused.
He's going to be very confused. You can find me on Instagram, Snakes and Bakes. You know, post there. You can message me there. You can email me, asplundii@gmail.com.
I love it, man.
Yeah, it was a good episode. I enjoyed it.
Love having you on. I really do.
I enjoy being on. Appreciate you guys having me.
This was episode 83, brought to you by Puget Sound Pythons. Right here. There we go. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all that good stuff. I think they have some stuff for sale. They were vending a show over the weekend. So
they were. And you know what I noticed? My favorite part of their booth pictures from the show was the Steve Irwin Funko Pops in the middle. I was like, that's my Gendra.
Yep. Excited to hang out with them. They're going to be at the preservation party as well, and Daytona. So
yeah, it's going to be awesome.
The gang's going to be there.
In the flesh.
I am very excited.
It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be a good weekend.
Yeah.
But we will see everyone Thursday. It'll be Phil, myself, and Jake. As we get Jake back into the saddle of things and
get him back up on that horse.
Yep. We will see everyone later.
Again, Travis, thank you. We love you.
Yes.
Well, not a problem. Like I said, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Anytime.